to New Rockstars. I'm Jessica Clemons, and they told us the virus was dead and gone and had moved on, but let me tell you, baby, 28 years later reminds us that the rage virus never really dies. I've eagerly awaited this sequel, anticipating another collaboration between Danny Boyle and Alex Garland for this franchise, and I am so excited. I was pleasantly surprised by the risks that they took while still maintaining that visual style and the human chaos and that moral ambiguity that we often see in these movies. I just wasn't prepared for it to be like a really deep mother and son story. They got me again. It's never about the infected, it's never about the zombies, it's about the humans. However, they concealed so much from us in the trailers. This movie explores numerous themes, and in this video we'll discuss all of them, along with the incredible technical aspects, the story, the disturbing ending, and of course the details you might have missed. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes launching your own website a breeze. But first, be sure to check out nerdriot.shop, where you can always find the latest and greatest in New Rockstars merch. Right now you can grab the shirt inspired by the biggest movie of the summer, Fantastic Four. Or am I talking Superman? Or am I talking Jurassic World? Grabbing some of the merch from nerdriot.shop is the best way to support the channel and look great doing it. We also got some Ironheart merch for you Ironheart heads. Okay, let's get into it. The film opens in the Scottish Highlands with a nod to the Teletubbies, reminding viewers that this story takes place 28 years ago when the show was at the height of its popularity. They use this cheerful and innocent world of the Teletubbies to contrast the horrific reality of the rage virus outbreak. This creates an immediate, visceral, disturbing, and brutal tone that lingers with us and unfortunately rears its ugly head back again at the very end of the movie. After watching his entire family be brutally murdered, little Jimmy sprints to his father's church, where his dad claims the rage virus outbreak is a day of judgment and welcomes the infected as a form of salvation. The rage virus persists in the sequel nearly 30 years after its initial outbreak. Over time, we discover that those infected by the rage virus have adapted and evolved, while humanity has somewhat regressed, living in isolated communities with new rules and traditions. Europe has successfully contained the infection, unlike the British Isles, which remain quarantined and disconnected from the world. The website Rage Leaks, that updates with top secret information regarding 28 years later, covers the Narrows, where they speak about the second wave, which we saw in 28 weeks later, were eventually then pushed back. Danny Boyle has specifically mentioned Brexit as a reference point in the development of 28 years later. Furthermore, I'd even add the significance of the COVID outbreak, where isolation played a crucial role reflecting how Britain became disconnected during the time. Both the movie and the real-world events can both be viewed as allegories demonstrating the long-term effects of the pandemic, the societal divides that emerge, and the anxiety of just stepping outside of your comfort zones, and the tendency to, reject the outside world. And let me tell you, after COVID, I stay inside my house. A fair share of the movie focuses on Holy Island, also known as Lindisfarne, England. While there isn't much to see beyond the village, other than the causeway that cuts you off from the mainland at high tide, they captured a lot of beauty in this coastal isolation. They used a lot of trippy wide angles and long takes of the landscape, allowing the environment to really just speak for itself. Danny Boyle is known for his epic visual storytelling, so it's not surprising he's challenged himself and the team to shoot with a bunch of iPhones. To Danny Boyle's credit, they utilized new technology while aiming to honor the instinct to use the ordinary, allowing the story to feel rooted in its true setting. Everybody has an iPhone, so why shouldn't this movie be shot on one? With the help of the cinematographer Don Mantle, they aim to portray some of the violence using a technique that Boyle referred to as a poor man's bullet time, similar to what you've seen in The Matrix. Bullet time is a visual effect that creates the illusion of slowing down or freezing time while allowing the viewer to move around the object. While The Matrix utilized a rig of 120 cameras and 2 motion picture cameras, 28 years later used 20 iPhones and a bunch of other weird equipment. They used a Beast Grip cage along with a custom-made depth of field adapter, also from Beast Grip, which was specifically designed for the movie to accommodate their desired lenses. For most shots, they utilized the Atlas Mercury anamorphic lenses, and when it was necessary to use the iPhones with their various rigs, they had several setups, one with 8 cameras, another with 10, and a third with 20. In addition to shooting on iPhones, they also used a special Panasonic camera for the red sequences, along with drones equipped with a 6K camera. To unify the visual style, they used the 276:1 aspect ratio, similar to what we saw in Sinners, The Creator, Oppenheimer, and The Hateful Eight, which famously utilized, IMAX or the Ultra Panavision rather than using cell phones or drones. This very wide frame for the movie, like Sinners, gives a different feeling of isolation and fear. You see the vast landscape, but you never really know what's lurking in the distance or in the shadows. It's all just very eerie and scary. On the island, we first meet Spike, played by Alfie Williams, who delivers a phenomenal performance in this movie. Similar to Owen Cooper's role as Jamie Miller in Netflix's Adolescence, Alfie plays really well off the adults in the movie. He responds authentically to every heightened action and nuanced emotion. It just feels emotionally honest, and he's aware of every moment, making it feel very genuine, and I can't wait to see this boy in the future. I'm obsessed with him. Good job, Alfie. We quickly learn that Spike's mother, Isla, portrayed by Jodie Comer, is very unwell, and the father, Jamie, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, continues to lead the household as the head of the family. Their routine life of caring for Isla is disrupted when she realizes that Jamie is taking Spike to the mainland. Danny Boyle referred to this moment in the interview with Mashable as Spike's blooding. This term describes a tradition associated with the hunter's first kill, where the blood of the animal is then smeared on the hunter's face. The royal family family, they do this. And 28 years later, the blooding is absolutely framed more as like a rite of passage. Throughout the movie, the people of Holy Island have encouraged a tradition in which the men must leave the village and venture out to the mainland, while most of the women remain within their homes or just gather within the village. This tradition is also tied to the idea while humanity is regressing inside the village, life in the infected areas continue to evolve and progress in contrast. When Spike and Jamie leave the village headed toward the causeway, we begin seeing warlike B-roll. We'll see it again when they're battling the infected as well. Brief cutaways from Laurence Olivier's 1944 adaptation of Henry V, specifically scenes from the Battle of Agincourt and young British soldiers marching in World War II. Though the footage may feel jarring, you might think it's because our two main characters are facing their own personal battles. That's true, but it also serves to highlight the significance of this village and the humans within it regressing to a simpler time. This is a time when survival really depended on our basic human instincts to protect one another, our community, and to maintain that resilience. For the British, this period was post-war 1950s, which is reflected in the village's return to traditional gender roles and romanticized view of a time where they felt somewhat safe. They asked themselves, would the world cease to evolve if technology abruptly stopped? What happens to people if that were the case? And instead of striving to evolve, they chose to remain in a familiar and safe environment, reminiscent of post-war Britain, telling themselves we got through it and pulled together. However, with this 1950s vibe comes the traditional gender roles. In the village, the girls take on certain tasks while the boys train in combat, hence the men and the boys marching in the B-roll. The use of bow and arrows, all interwoven with the themes of men defending their home. It creates a nostalgic atmosphere heavily influenced by Rudyard Kipling's poem Boots, Boots, Boots to bring it all home. However, midway through the movie, we'll see Spike begin to reject this regressive mindset and the life they've come to accept. Spliced with that B-roll are ships that monitor the isolation zone, and as we'll learn later, the UK is now referred to as the unconditional isolation zone, surrounded by a no-fly zone and patrolling NATO ships. We'll meet the NATO officers later. However, if you revisit the secret website for 28 years later and enter the password Memento Mori, I can't even say that without crying, you'll find more information about the missing Swedish officers and the cover-up by those in higher positions. Of the files, Life on Patrol is a girlfriend for the NATO officer Karsten, who's worried she hasn't heard back from her boyfriend in a long time. Variant disclosed the information on the different types of infected. Aerial Recon captured the Bone Temple, and Mayday covers their ship sinking. When they reach the forest, we encounter our first evolved infected. They call them the Slow Lows. Interestingly, Boyle discussed the different variants and provided a very compelling explanation for them.
In order to, if you're burning up that many calories, you need to replace them. So they end up, they're beginning to hunt, as our predecessors did.
Beyond simply learning to survive in the wild, these creatures have adapted because the rage virus consumes a significant amount of their calories. To replenish their energy, they had to find ways to survive. As a result, these chunkier infected have learned to conserve their energy by gathering worms and foraging for other food on the ground.
And actually just gather kind of worms and bugs and grubs around the ground like that and become kind of return to the ground in a way.
In contrast, the other variants of the virus act like steroids, making them larger and more aggressive. Those infected have learned to hunt in packs, often with a designated leader, aka the Alpha. There's a scene in the movie where the hunters track down a deer and the Alpha takes the head and places it in a tree. I thought this was a psychological act that reflects Dr. Kelson, played by Ralph Fiennes, who can make the Alphas submit and then stares them deep in their eyes. It's similar to showing a dog who the Alpha is. I imagine that the infected would mimic Dr. Kelson's dominant behavior by also placing a head in a tree, just as he does with the heads on the Bone Temple. Boyle and Garland compared this behavior to how dogs organize their belongings, as they have been known to arrange their treats and foods or toys in specific organized manners. So I might be wrong, but I do like my idea and my theory. It's June, and I know a lot of you out there are new grads who are trying to figure out how to put your book learning to use in the real world. You gotta put yourself out there, whether you're starting a business or just looking for work. Ignore your parents' advice about getting a nice business card made. Yeah, get that out of here. What you need is a website, and Squarespace is the best way to go about building one. Squarespace is the all-in-one tool that gives you everything you need to make a website that looks good and does whatever you need it to do. Every Squarespace website is optimized to be indexed with meta descriptions and auto-generated sitemap and more, so you show up more often to more people in a global search engine result. If you're not a graphic designer, don't worry. Squarespace Design Intelligence tool makes it so easy to get your website looking just right. It combines 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise with cutting-edge AI technology. If you're selling goods or services, Squarespace can also help you untangle digital payment platforms with just a few clicks, making it super easy to start receiving payments right away using popular payment methods like Apple Pay, ACH Direct Debit, Klarna, and more. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/newrockstars to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. After finding refuge in the abandoned house, the group prepares for Spike and Jamie's return. An interesting detail here is the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II hanging on the wall. The portrait stands alone, which suggests that they still honor her and perhaps believe she's still alive, and they're unaware of who actually survived this. Back with Spike and Jamie, I think the Alpha actually planned the stampede that destroyed the house. The two get out minorly unscathed, and then the Alpha is chasing them on the causeway, and this is one of the most traumatic scenes in the movie. Jenny tells them to wait because the incubation period for the virus is almost instantaneous, so it looks like for her it's about 10 seconds. In an interview with the cinematographer Dodd Mantle, it was revealed that they used an old COVID vaccination center for filming this scene. This location featured a gigantic hall where they constructed a causeway themselves. They filled the space with water and maintained a controlled temperature, and the entire set measured 540 feet in length and included a gate in the middle that needed to be well lit. To achieve the desired lighting effect in the sky, they actually utilized VFX, incorporating plates that they got from an astronomy center. Insane. The shoot involved the use of cranes and tracks along the side with 2 dollies operating simultaneously and 2 techno cranes in action. They also used a bar cam, the rig with an array of iPhones mounted on the techno crane. This entire filming process also took about 3 to 4 days. For this one scene. Literally, that's insane. The decision to create this elaborate setup was actually from the concerns about the dangers with the actual causeway, especially considering that Alfie, one of the young actors, was only 13 years old at the time. So he already has restrictions on the number of hours he can shoot in a day, so this approach helped optimize everyone's time and safety. After discovering that his dad has been cheating on his mom, Spike feels infuriated, disgusted, and betrayed. Following a fight with Jamie, he decides to break his mom out of the village in search of Dr. Kelson, the madman, hoping he can cure whatever Isla has. Isla, as we later learn, is suffering from terminal brain cancer. At times, she experiences bouts of rage, confusion, memory loss, and hallucinations. However, her character still reflects the small amount of compassion and sacrifice that has been diminished in this world. 28 Years Later shifts its tone from what we've seen in 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later. A significant change for me is the coming of age story for Spike in a world ravaged by animalistic infecteds, and the film giving a stronger voice to women. While female characters have always been present in the past films, in 28 Years Later they're portrayed not as optional characters, but as actual driving force essential to the story. Isla embodies deep humanity and compassion, which starkly contrasts with the aggressive and brutal nature of many of the male characters in this world and of the world itself. The arc of her story with Spike, it broke my heart, but she is just so important. We officially meet the NATO soldiers, with our primary focus being on Erik. However, they're immediately ambushed, clearly by the infected, after their patrol boat had to land on shore. It seems that they may have been investigating the virus mutations and gathering information from the Rage Leaks website, although this is not really completely confirmed within the movie. After escaping, we see the infected drinking, playing, or perhaps just passing time in this creek, but attention is stolen by the pregnant infected shuffling past. She's extremely pregnant, and she comes back in a very significant part later, giving birth to a seemingly normal baby with no infection with the help of Isla. The fact that this baby is either free of infection or asymptomatic is a plot that's sort of featured in 28 Weeks Later. However, this detail is never mentioned and no one really knows about it, seeing as though the woman died immediately. Additionally, we don't really revisit much of 28 Weeks Later in this movie. Dr. Kelson is later intrigued by the baby and comments saying the miracle of the placenta, suggesting that the placenta likely protected the baby in utero from the virus. All in all, I really love this birth scene. I love everything about it. I really love the compassion shown in this moment. First of all, the notion that the zombies might have evolved to the point where they can procreate is astounding. If the woman was pregnant when she was infected and the baby shows no outward signs of infection like those we've seen before, that's just remarkable. From a scientific perspective within this world, this development is groundbreaking. Yet despite the movie's tone, it is so beautiful to see that humanity can still strive to exist as shown between Isla and the infected without the brutality and anger that pervades this world. The successful natural delivery and the backdrop of death and infection just gives hope to everybody. It's similar to how the movie starts by showcasing the cheerful world of the Teletubbies before plunging into the dark violent rage outbreak that destroys this poor family. In contrast, this scene shows that life and the future of children still can flourish in this dark, twisted world. In this moment, Isla represents the potential we can strive for in the future, suggesting that perhaps we don't need to regress, we can actually look forward, we can try to teach them. I don't know, I just really like this scene. Later, the Alpha, also known as Samson, arrives at the train after the delivery. From the cries of the baby mixed with the gunshots and the sudden silence from the female infected, it's implied that Samson may be the baby's father. The way he holds and looks at the dead body of the female infected, along with his relentless pursuit of Spike and Isla, suggests that he is searching for the baby. Although we never see Samson reclaim this baby, Danny Boyle mentioned that he will return in the sequel 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. Maybe he'll get the baby. After finally meeting Dr. Kelson, an eccentric man you initially believe he's a villain. However, it becomes very clear that he is so compassionate and just misunderstood. Dr. Kelson was a doctor before the outbreak, but it seems the people of Holy Island either don't like him or found him to be a little bit too eccentric. Their viewpoint didn't help once we saw his bone temple either. In a previous interview with Empire, Ralph Fiennes elaborated on his character, saying he's a survivor and the way he survived is very interesting. He's quite out there in his views of the world. And he also added, I think audiences will assume something about him and then see where it goes. And I certainly had my doubts. I thought, how can they portray a good guy when he's burning bodies and collecting their skulls? Then I realized two important things. One, what is truly ethical in a world like this? And B, he's doing it to honor them. When talking to Spike, he used the term memento mori, to remember death and acknowledge the inevitable. He highlights the importance of remembering and honoring those who died. This also feels right for someone that was a doctor before the outbreak. He's seen so much death before this and just more now, and the difference is the respect and honor the dead get. Unfortunately, after diagnosing Isla, the doctor tells her and Spike that her cancer is terminal and she has very little time left. Spike initially refuses to believe this. He's in shock and feels frustrated, especially after traveling such a long distance only to learn that there is no cure. And it also irritates me that this poor boy was unaware that some conditions couldn't be cured even before the outbreak. He had so much blind faith and hope because his community refused to acknowledge the outside world or just educate them about it. I don't want to dwell on this sad scene for too long. However, Dr. Kelson and Isla decide to end her life peacefully rather than allowing her to continue suffering. Kelson honors this request by using one of his morphine-laced darts to gently take her out. This scene is both heartbreaking and just very beautiful. As Spike drifts in and out of consciousness from the morphine meant to keep him from intervening, the flames from the cremation of Isla's body send sparks into the sky like fireworks in a small cyclone. It's almost as if her spirit is ascending. After her cremation, Kelson cleans her skull and allows Spike to place it on the bone temple. And this act transforms her death into a monumental spiritual and personal tribute. It's also significant for Spike's journey as he begins to understand death and humanity. After going on a real blooding journey with his mother and encountering various people and things, Spike has decided to return the baby to the village. Her name is now Isla, after his mother. And interestingly, I should have mentioned earlier that Isla's name means island. And this is ironic given that they sequester themselves on an island, but it could also imply that Isla herself is isolated, distinct, and different from the others, much like an island. After they deliver the baby to Jamie, he freaks out, missing his son. He chases to the edge of the water, screaming for him in this blood-curdling scream. The baby being delivered back to the village by Spike, seemingly normal, could also be seen as Spike showing the villagers that the world is continuing to live outside the village. They don't need to sequester themselves anymore. They don't need to regress. And this is what I was talking about earlier, with Spike eventually rejecting a regressive mindset and the life they've come to accept. We then encounter Jack O'Connell's wild character Jimmy, and his group arrives with this variety of outrageous weapons, wearing a mismatched tracksuits and vibrant colors. They all have striking blonde hair that falls to their shoulders, reminiscent of his cousins, whom we saw at the beginning of the film. And similar to the opening sequence, a punk metal rendition of Teletubbies' theme song plays as they wreak havoc on the infected. When I mentioned that the people of Holy Island probably assumed the Queen had survived, it's important to remember that the outbreak occurred in 2002. Consequently, many events that took place in our real world never happened in theirs. And I enjoyed this scene because it captures the chaos that I love, although I then recognize that this character is dressed in a manner reminiscent of the British media personality and prolific sexual abuser Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile was a monster, and following his death in 2011, numerous claims of rape and sexual abuse came to light. What were once dismissed as rumors during his life when he was alive began to appear more credible after his death. Over the years, the extent of his horrific crimes have become increasingly clear to the public, and I hate this man. He was protected through most of his life by powerful officials, bosses, and prominent public figures. If you have the stomach, you can watch the freaking documentary. Essentially, the crimes were never brought to light in this world, and if any rumors existed, it's important to note that Jimmy was a child when the outbreak began, so he's unaware of it. And choosing Jimmy Savile as a reference point feels almost too diabolical, but he did serve a cultural role to the Brits, similar to like us with Mr. Rogers. I've seen discussions about Jimmy's age and the time frame, suggesting that he might not have been an actual fan of Jimmy Savile, especially since his career started to decline in the 1990s. However, just like with Mr. Rogers, it just really depends on the individual, because I watched Mr. Rogers and I was born in '94. This also adds depth to the idea that Danny Boyle discussed in interviews, where we romanticize the past and how it can often have a darker, more sinister foundation. Boyle spoke with The Independent about Jack O'Connell's character, Jimmy Crystal, stating the role of Jack O'Connell's character and his family, which essentially serve as replacement for the family he loses at the beginning of the film, is to reintroduce evil into what becomes a compassionate environment. He further elaborated that Alex Garland suggested that the first film is about family, while the second film focuses on the nature of evil. In the film, Jimmy wears his father's cross upside down, which could symbolize his opposition to his father's Christian beliefs. While his father viewed this as a day of salvation, Jimmy perceives it as a fun battle. There's also a possibility that he did believe in his father's teachings, but like twisted them to fit his own perspective. We see graffiti on a house that worships Jimmy, and the infected bear his name etched into their skin. He may see himself as their savior during the apocalypse. apocalypse. Regardless of the dark lifestyle he leads, we can anticipate its exploration in the sequel written by Alex Garland and directed by Nia DaCosta of Candyman. We can expect more Ralph Fiennes, more Samson, and more disturbing adventures for Spike as he uncovers the truths that have been long kept from him. I also expect Aaron Taylor Johnson to return in search of his son, while the village may face their own challenges in welcoming a baby that could potentially be infected with a virus. And that's it for my breakdown of 28 Years Later. I really like this movie, and I think it was genuinely such a beautiful take. I didn't even talk about the infected and their dongs. I was just talking about how much I love the compassion. I wish I had more time to analyze things and to include Easter eggs maybe, but I was busy this week writing Ironheart for the channel, but I just wanted to talk about the movie nonetheless because I love this movie. I'm so excited for the sequel, 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, debuting January 2026. Hopefully the third movie gets financed as soon as possible. Comment down below your thoughts on 28 Years Later, and a special thanks to one of our YouTube members, TDS on a Quest, who supports us at the executive producer level. Follow me at Lulu_Clemons, subscribe to all 4 channels in the new Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later.